The 15th century Europe was signed by the rise to power of Cosimo de' Medici and his family's patronage of the arts and humanities that made Florence into the cradle of the Renaissance, and also by the cultural rebirth that was connected with great names like Michelangelo Buonarroti, Leonardo da Vinci, and Raffaello Sanzio. This cultural rise was though clouded by the sudden appearance of a new threat to Europe, not the leprosy, not the plague, not the sweating disease or the smallpox. These four apocalyptic riders bringing death and despair, but the syphilis. But one man appeared, proclaiming to have found a way how to fight and cure this new disease by proposing a new remedy for the Great Pox. This man was called Tommaso Rangone. Today we will have a look at this new disease flagellating Europe starting from the end of the 15th century, the influence of this new disease on fashion choices, and also the fascinating person of Tommaso Rangone and his traces in Venice. When Charles VIII died, only 28 years young, in 1498, he hadn't accomplished anything relevant in his life, neither for himself, neither for his reign. Nevertheless, this libertine should influence the history of Europe like none other before, and more than any other philosopher, politician, warlord, or artist at the time. 5 years before his death, Charles had the amazing idea of reclaiming the territories of the House Anjou, the reign of Naples. And so Charles decided to move his army of 20,000 mercenary soldiers composed of various nationalities like Spanish, French, Dutch, Swiss, and Germans direction Naples. Long story short, Charles entered Naples in triumph in 1495 and was crowned there, but the opposition of Milan, Austria, Venice and the Pope was already rallying against him. He escaped with difficulty, and when Charles VIII turned back to Lyon, about 1 year later, his army brought back a disease that would castigate Europe nearly like none other for centuries: the syphilis. The mortality rate in reality was quite low, not more than 5%, but in its last and third stadium the disease led to dementia and problems of controlling muscle movement. Problems with muscle movement might not be a big nuisance, but dementia was a very relevant symptom, especially when those suffering from it were nobles or even royalty. Many noble houses, kings or even popes alike were devoured by this new disease, and you can imagine that having a demented king or pope at power made sure that not always wise and prudential political choices were made. If you wonder about which popes fell into their grave devoured by the Great Pox, one of the most famous examples is Pope Leo X, better known as Giovanni di Lorenzo de' Medici, who you might recognize from this famous painting by Raphael, or from the Netflix show The Medici, as he is the son of Lorenzo il Magnifico. It's also not a coincidence that fashion choices changed over the centuries whilst the syphilis raged in Europe and then also in Africa and Asia, fundamentally to hide the symptoms of this annoying affliction. The elegant high-towering wigs were hiding bald heads, but baldness not due to shaving but due to the hair loss during the illness. The elegant white gloves hid the ulcers and protected from transmission. The jabot in lace, decorative neckwear, hid the spots on the collar, while powder was meant to hide the ulcers popping up on the fair noble faces. It's very interesting that the progress of the syphilis through Europe and the world can actually be tracked down by looking at how the name changed from one country to the next. This disease was first found in Naples, thus being called Pox of Naples or Italian disease, then becoming the French disease. From France, the sickness spread across to Germany, and then in the beginning of the 16th century, this German disease broke out in Poland. From there, this Polish disease was then imported in Russia, while the Turks simply called it the disease of the Christians, contrary to the Persians who thought it was the disease of the Turks. Whilst it seems that all these countries blamed essentially their neighbors for the Great Pox, there was a restricted group of persons that was considered the very source of this new curse. People generally search for a scapegoat during difficult times that they can blame for their mishaps, and in Renaissance Italy, these scapegoats who were the only ones to blame for this new illness were the prostitutes. In Venice, prostitutes had to report to authorities in case of sickness in order to be healed, or rather excluded. As there was no cure for these women, they were housed in a specialized hospital that was founded in 1522 and called l'Ospedale degli Incurabili, or in English, the Hospital of the Incurables. Today it is, by the way, the seat of the Academy of Fine Arts. Obviously, it was only the women transmitting this disease, not men, who were essentially the victims of these malicious and sick women. This led to the isolation and to the death of numerous women that in reality had also been victims of the sickness themselves. But then the salvation arrived in the person of Tommaso Rangone. Tommaso Gianotti, later called Rangone, that you can see depicted on the facade of San Giuliano Church in Venice, was born in Ravenna in August 1493 in a quite wealthy, middle-class family, and this wealth permitted him to enroll in the University of Bologna, starting from 1510 when he was 17 years old. In university, he dedicated himself to the fields of philosophy and, more important for his later life, medicine. By the way, Bologna is the oldest university in the Occident, founded nearly 1,000 years ago. Many masterminds walked the halls of this prestigious university. For example, Leon Battista Alberti, the man who wrote an influential book in 1435 that included a system of mathematical rules known as the linear perspective to help painters achieve the goal of realism. Francesco Petrarca, a poet of the early Renaissance, and together with Boccaccio and Dante, he's one of the big three names you should remember when it comes to Italian literature. Nicolaus Copernicus, who was the man who discovered that actually the sun was the center of the universe. Umberto Eco, amongst others, a medievalist and philosopher who became famous for his book The Name of the Rose. But let's turn back to Tommaso Gianotti. He himself stayed for 6 years in his forge of intellectuals before moving to Rome and becoming the private doctor of Cardinal Domenico Grimani, a Venetian nobleman that took votes and was the son of the later Doge Antonio Grimani, that you can see actually depicted in the Doge's palace in a painting by the renowned artist Titian. 1 year later, in 1517, he probably followed Grimani to his home region, the Veneto region, before deciding to change job in 1520. He swapped his charge at the Grimani household to work at the court of Guido Rangoni in Modena. Rangoni was one of the generals of the papal army and had been nominated military commander of Modena by the Pope himself. In these years, the Pope, the French king, Venice, Florence and Milan decided to unite their forces in a league against Charles VIII, the Holy Roman Emperor, in order to drive him away from the Italian peninsula. Tommaso was actually present when in May 1527 the Count Rangoni took his arms to help defend Rome from the imperial troops and Charles V. By the way, without any success, as Charles was able to conquer Rome and thus triggering the escape of numerous intellectuals from Rome, amongst others Jacopo Sansovino, who will flee to Venice and stay there, essentially coining today's look of St. Mark's Square by building the Mint, the library, and the Procuratie Vecchie. The Count Rangoni instead was captured by the imperial troops and held captive. But once he was released, Tommaso traveled with him to Venice, and here he gave his demission and lived and stayed for the rest of his life in the floating city. During these years of service for the Count Rangoni, Tommaso actually became the permission to use the noble surname of his master as his own, and this is the reason why we know him today, not as Tommaso Gianotti, but as Tommaso Rangone. But let's get back to the facade of the San Giuliano Church that I already showed you before, and let's discover why Tommaso was depicted on it. The San Giuliano Church had significant structural problems in the 16th century, and this is the reason why the church was rebuilt by, well, the star architect of the time, Jacopo Sansovino. Tommaso Rangone, with the permission of the Republic of Venice, in 1553 financed the reconstruction of the facade that was executed by the same Sansovino and finished by Alessandro Vittoria. Fortunately, for Tommaso, the roof came down during the reconstruction works, and so Rangone offered to pay also for the reconstruction of the roof. In change, he only wanted to be buried in the presbytery, the holiest part of the church, hoping in a future resurrection and immortal glory. What a humble man. But let's get back to the facade. Everything you see depicted around Tommaso are symbols standing for his immense knowledge and wisdom. Did I already tell you that he was a very humble man? On his right side you can see a celestial globe, more precisely the northern hemisphere, inclined by 44 degrees at the exact latitude of Venice. It shows the Great Square and the constellations that were visible during the birth of Tommaso Rangone on the 18th of August 1493 under the sign of the lion. Below you can spot a cube that together with the celestial globe represents stability and movement, earth and sky, finite and infinite. On the left, above the table with the books, you can see the Earth instead, with its axis and the South Pole inclined contrary to the celestial globe, showing us the Atlantic Ocean and also South America. And South America is actually a reference to the plant that Tommaso is holding in his hand. But I will come to this detail later. One book is actually lying open on the table while Tommaso holds another one in his hand, seemingly reading out of it and teaching us. You can read an inscription on it that means that God can be found in the immensely big and the immensely tiny things, the macrocosm and the microcosm. But the auto-celebration of our humble Tommaso doesn't finish here, but continues in the 3 inscriptions done in 3 different languages: Greek, Hebrew and Latin. The Greek one speaks about the cultural merits of Tommaso, bringing glory to the universities of Bologna, Rome and also Padua. The Hebrew inscription reminds walkers-by about a treatise written by Tommaso, in which he states that it is possible to live until the age of 120 by conducting a healthy and calm life, following the right diet, discipline and having faith in God. He observes that this possibility is also promised in the Bible, in the Genesis, and thus this inscription was next to the Greek and Latin inscription done in Hebrew. A pity though that even though Tommaso knew the secret to become 120 years old, he just reached the age of 84. The one in Latin states some biographical data, amongst others that Tommaso gave 32 students the possibility to study for free in a college that he founded himself in Padua. But this college was not the only thing Tommaso financed, he was a real patron. In 1562, for example, he became the Guardian Grando, the, let's say, director of the Confraternity of St. Mark, one of the most prestigious and important ones of the city. He convinced the other members of the Confraternity not only to commission 1, but 3 paintings paid for by Rangone himself, depicting miracles of St. Mark, and also to decorate the room for the reunions with frescoes. He also would have liked his own bust on the facade of the Confraternity, but the other members blocked at least this plan of him. The 3 paintings with the common theme of St. Mark, as they were meant to decorate the Confraternity dedicated to the evangelist, were commissioned to Jacopo Tintoretto, one of the Renaissance artists next to Titian and Veronese, and can be found in the Academy galleries in Venice. If you look closer, you can see in all 3 paintings the same man depicted, the profile of Tommaso Rangone himself. And actually not only in 3 paintings but in 4, as Tommaso Rangone can also be spotted in the breakthrough work of Tintoretto, The Miracle of the Slave, on the left hand side. As I said, a very humble man. As you can imagine, most of the members didn't tolerate that Rangone was depicted in all paintings and furthermore in a very central part of the story, and thus in August 1573 the new Guardian Grando decided to give the paintings back to Rangone, but Tommaso refused them and sent them back to the Confraternity, which then sent them to the painter Tintoretto, who offered to substitute the figure of Rangone with another one. In the end, Tintoretto didn't repaint his artworks and turned them back to the Confraternity without any modifications. Thus we can still see Tommaso in these 4 legendary scenes today. But this was still not enough for Tommaso. In September 1571 he financed a long arcade just next to the sacristy of the San Gimignano church that once stood in St. Mark's Square, the most important square in Venice. And in this arcade, each and every year, marriage portions that Tommaso gifted himself were distributed to the poor girls so they could get married. And that might sound strange to you, but once women without money or a marriage portion were actually not able to find a husband and get married, risking to stay forever a spinster or, in the worst case, to finish in prostitution. To thank Tommaso for his generosity, the procurators of St. Mark dedicated him a bronze bust above one of the entrance gates of the church, and this bust was fused by none other than the famous artist Alessandro Vittoria. Tommaso was even named Count Palatine by the Emperor Maximilian II, and owned a very important collection of books that he considered himself, obviously, one of the 7 wonders of the world. 5 years later, Tommaso died in Venice on the 10th September 1577, aged 84, and was buried as he wished in the San Giuliano church between Rialto and St. Mark's Square. But how was Tommaso Rangone able to pay for all these paintings and buildings? Well, he became filthy rich with the sales of a miraculous remedy, a remedy that you can actually see in his burial monument. So let's have a look at the last part of the self-adulation of Tommaso. Tommaso is sitting in the center part of the facade, clothed in a toga, standing for his university degree, while holding a book and a branch in his hands. The branch in his right hand is actually the cure for the syphilis. This plant is called smilax and originates from South America. Reason why South America was actually depicted on the globe. Remember, you never heard the name smilax before? Well, you have for sure seen it as a child in television, as it is the famous Smurf berry. Now, considering that there are many Smurfs living all together in one village with only one Smurfette, I guess that the unconditional love of the Smurfs for this miraculous berry makes even more sense, doesn't it? Imagine that there was even a drink that was very fashionable in the 19th century made from smilax and called sarsaparilla that also inspired American root beer, by the way. In reality, Tommaso never found a cure for the syphilis, and up until 1909 there had not been a cure for this disease. It was Paul Ehrlich who, after numerous experiments, and if I say numerous, I really mean numerous, found a cure based on the poison arsenic that didn't damage the body too much. Yes, you heard right, not too much. The successful experiment that led to the production of the remedy salvarsan was the number 606. Now, did you know that the Smurf berry was considered a remedy for syphilis? Let me know in the comment section below, and either way, thank you so much for watching.